Hey everyone, welcome to the Tech Grinder podcast, where we are breaking new ground and pushing past the status quo when it comes to the startup ecosystem. But before we get started, the podcast has been created for entertainment and educational purposes only, and nothing in the content should be taken as investment advice. To see the full disclaimer, go to www.techgrinder.com. That's www.techgrinder.com. So let's get started, and we hope you enjoy this episode. Okay, so let's get into it. Communication. It is pretty logical to say that communication is a very important part of our lives, whether it be in business or in our everyday lives. As technology advances, the ways and means in which we can communicate are advancing right along with it, but it still doesn't change the fact that communicating and communication is still hard. For example, we are always trying to figure out how to convey what TechGrinder.com and the Tech Grinder podcast are all about, and also how it all came about. We try to write short tweets and even write about it inside the graphic designs we create for social media. One way to explain it is, Tech Grinders are folks that basically work their face off. Yes, it could be folks that use technology and work or create online, but for us, it is not exclusive to that. Tech Grinders are simply folks that work really, really hard. Communication takes thought and energy. Our preferred style of communication is soft-spoken and filled with kindness. Some might not agree, but that won't influence us. Communication can also take on other forms besides words and spoken words. Sometimes communication can happen with art, photography, and video, or what some may call visual art. And again, as technology advances, visual art will probably advance right along with it on a communication level. But let's tap the brakes a little bit and talk about basic communication. You know, the kind of communication when you want to make something happen, like selling a product or service, or explaining a product or service, or trying to tell the story of your new startup or company, or creating a resume, cover letter, or interviewing for a job. The world might be changing with generative AI, but again, it is logical to say that human communication is not going away anytime soon. So how do we choose how we are going to communicate? How do we choose our style of communication? Earlier we said our preferred style is soft-spoken and filled with kindness, but that might not be everyone's glass of water. Communication is at the forefront of so much of our lives, business lives, and in business in general. If we step back and deeply look at communication when it comes to business, communication is so much of what businesses are trying to do with their marketing and advertising. They are trying to tell their story or provide information about a product or service. They are trying to tell a story with words, audio, or video. Another thing that is occurring when it comes to communication is the fact that we are communicating much more in writing. We email and text our friends and colleagues, and sometimes we don't even realize that we haven't actually spoken to them in a long time. So the question is, are we throwing our verbal communication skills into the wind? As time progresses, will we have to shake off the dust when it comes to our verbal communication skills, and maybe even practice in the mirror, record ourselves, or even video ourselves to practice? But if we begin to dive deep into verbal communication, there will be times in our lives when it will be crucial. One example is when we are seeking employment. We could go through rounds of digital communication in the application process, but when it comes to that actual phone, video chat, or in-person interview, that is when our verbal communication skills have to shine. And as we move forward, Will people enter job interviews with rusty verbal communication skills? And could they lose job opportunities because of it? The next example is giving a presentation. Yes, there are lots of ways to create digital presentations, but at some point we may be asked to give a live presentation. And again, that is where our verbal communication skills will need to shine. The last example is a pitch presentation. Yes, pitch presentations can happen in writing or a slide deck, but at some point again we will likely have to present it in some form of a live setting. So it seems logical that as we move forward, it could be beneficial to stay current and work on our verbal communication skills, even if the world is predominantly communicating through email or messaging. As we begin to wrap up this episode about communication, even if the scorecard might be tilted a little towards written communication in relation to where communication is focused at this time in history, we felt compelled to point out how important verbal communication is. We hope you enjoyed this podcast episode titled Communication, Our Preferred Style is Soft-Spoken and Filled with Kindness. Until next time, thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Tech Grinder podcast. If you'd like to continue the conversation, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time.